Thank you. Thank you, Elena, for your invitation to share my thoughts on ethics in research with you. I prepared PowerPoint presentation, which I'll share with you. The main goal of this presentation is to introduce you with ethics, what ethics is, what maybe it's not, what we can expect from it, which are the main theories in ethics. We'll also say something about moral motivation, and I'll specifically dedicate my attention to ethics in research, which will be a big part of my talk. Now, I will turn off my camera before I'll start sharing my PowerPoint presentation, because usually if I try to do both, the system notifies me that there are connectivity issues. So here we go. First, you can see the PowerPoint probably, and I'm turned off. I'll be back with you for the Q&A session. And now, please bear with me for around, I think that I'll be done in about 40 to 45 minutes. So the role of ethics in research, and first thing that we have to explain is what actually ethics is. So what is ethics? Ethics, its main goal is moral justification of our actions, of our behavior, and also sometimes our beliefs, our intentions, because often what we think we want to do, what we intend, also matters morally. So ethics is trying to justify our conduct with respect to the concepts of good, of course, morally good, and just. I'm emphasizing morally good because you can also have a good car or a good knife, and that doesn't mean that it's morally impeccable. So it's good to add morally good. Now, ethics actually comes from a Greek word ethos, which means character, or mores, M-O-R-E-S, mores, way of behaving, like rituals. And this is also connected with Latin word mores, from which morality stems etymologically. So morality and ethics are often coterminous, so they mean the same thing. Well, this definition of ethics means that ethics is not a descriptive, but it's normative science. So let me explain what this difference is. Ethics doesn't just want to describe behavior like ethnography, maybe. In ethnography, you have descriptions of rituals, so what people do. But that's not the same as trying to say which behavior is morally better than the other. So because ethics is concerned with the later, it's normative science. It tries to provide the norms, orientation for our moral behavior. Now, as a science, ethics has also its methodology. It's worth noting here that ethics is one of traditional philosophical branches. So in philosophy, we have ontology, which is basically the study of what exists. Materialism, idealism, and so on are different ontological theories. Next, you have epistemology, which is theory of knowledge. Then you have logics, which is theory of inference. Next, you have aesthetics, which is concerned with the beautiful. And then you have ethics, which is concerned with good and just. So it's part of philosophy, and as such, it has a special methodology. Its methodology is not empirical. So you can't prove anything empirically in ethics, because you have to decide what is good or what is evil before you actually make observations. So main ethical method is conceptual analysis. You will see what conceptual analysis is today in practice in a way. But for now, we can say that conceptual analysis is connected with trying to see what are the presuppositions of our statements. It also compares different notions. For instance, if you would compare good to just, then you might find some connections between the two notions, but also maybe some differences and so on. It's also connected with analysis of inference. So this is main ethical methodology. Next, this is very important. What is the role of ethics? Often people think that the main role of ethicians is to provide us with or to tell us how to act, so what we should do. That's not actually the case. The role of ethics is not to decide instead of us. So ethics cannot basically take away your individual moral responsibility. You, as a human being, as a person who can and therefore also should act morally, is always an individual that's responsible for her or his own actions. So no one can take away the burden, let's call it the burden of freedom, which alludes to existentialism, of course. So you always have to act on your own, and the last decisions are always your decisions. And it's futile and also utopic to expect that ethics will be like an algorithm which will tell you, do this, don't do that, that's correct, that's incorrect. What ethics can do is to provide guidelines, and more specifically, what it can do is that it provides you with a conceptual toolkit. So it can give you some instruments with which you can better analyze your moral position, the structure of your moral dilemma which you are tackling, and then it can help you make more informed decision. So this is the role of ethics. So you should expect from philosophers to help you understand your position in the world and to help you make better decisions, not to tell you what to do. And maybe this is also important here to point out and to connect to this point. This is also the difference between ethics and law. So legal decrees are binding. So you can be forced into prison, or you're forced to pay fines and so on. The legal sanctions follow if you disobey law. And nothing like that happens in ethics in a way. So ethics cannot force you into anything, but you do become immoral. So that's the difference. In ethics, we don't have laws in the sense of paragraphs or in the sense of legal decrees. What we do have are different moral theories. We do have codes, ethical codes, which are often connected to those theories, and we will touch upon these later. But it's not that ethics could force you into anything. It suggests you, or it tries to help you understand your moral position, and paint the options that you have for your conduct and behavior. So those introductory remarks are, I think, quite important to bear in mind. So do not expect from ethics that it will be like an algorithm that will solve your problems. To the contrary, it will actually open up problems that you will have to solve on your own. However, you can turn to it for help, for orientation. Let's, it just crossed my mind. Maybe the nice analogy would be the following. It's like a compass, If you have a compass and if you are lost, the compass won't walk instead of you. You will have to do the walking on your own. However, it will point to the direction into which you should go, or which you should take. So, okay, ethics in research. You all are researchers, and that's why you're here. And surely you would want to hear something more about specifically ethics in the research. Now, usually ethical codes are composed in such a way that they address the needs of, let's call them, 4 stakeholders. And then subsequently, these are also 4 main chapters of ethical codes. Ethical codes could be a bit different. They could, stem from different theories. They could be organized in a different way. Often they also stress the importance of different virtues and of different concepts that are dear to them and to the specific profession to which they refer, but usually they all have this this overarching structure. So which are these four stakeholders? The first one obviously are research subjects. So research subjects could be either humans, animals, plants, or even inanimate objects. Research subjects are subjects which are on which you conduct your research. And of course, these are usually the most heavily emphasized part of ethics in research. So it's really important how we behave, what our attitude towards them is. Please also pay attention here. I think this is one of the most important messages I have prepared for you today. The first principle, I think, is the following. Science is here for the well-being of living beings, living organisms, for us. It's not the other way around. We are not here for science. And this is something we always have to bear in mind. Why? Because as scientists, we are driven by powerful desire. We have this really big eros to discover truth, to seek, to widen our horizons, to find out new things, to, you know, we can stay up all night behind our books or in laboratory. We can travel miles when we search for I don't know, for animals, for minerals, whatever you have. So we are driven by this powerful desire to know. Sometimes, of course, it's not excluded. Sometimes we have monetary and also career desires and motives, which direct us into our actions. And therefore, we often forget about our primary task. We forget that we are actually not conducting all this research because of itself or because of us, but because of others, because of the society, and because of the well-being of every inhabitant of this planet. So because of this desire to get the data, we often forget that we are extracting data from our research subjects. And it's really hard. It's really hard to step out of this scientific mindset and go to the other side and think, well, what am I actually doing? What am I actually sacrificing here? Who are my research subjects? How do they feel? How can I actually help them with my research after the research will be over? And so on. So please, again, remember this one. Science is here for the well-being of everybody. It's not the other way around. We are not here for science. So this is the really, really important principle. Now, more specifically, when we speak about research subjects, we should generally avoid killing or inflicting any kind of harm on them. So any kind of harm entails, of course, physical harm as well as psychological harm. And we should not do this if they are really not very, very, very good and substantial reasons to do that. And I'll speak about those a little bit later when we'll delve into specific moral paradigms and theories. Also, what is also very important, and maybe this is not so important for you because I gather that you are all work in more in biological sciences. However, in some other science, or maybe it even is important for you, it's very problematic if you induce subjects to engage in immoral or unlawful practices. For instance, if you would be a psychologist and if your research would be such that it would demand from your research subjects to consciously lie or to do harm to others, that would be highly problematic, actually, and it's very tough to get permission for such research. So Stanford experiment and so on are experiments from the past, because it's very hard to get permission to do this today, because you are there actually inducing subjects in immoral practice. And why is this problematic? Because they can suffer trauma because of that, of course. So this is all entailed into avoiding to inflict any kind of harm on the research subjects. Next, of course, you should always treat them with dignity and the respect. Of course, this goes for animals as well as humans. And also sometimes, you see, we can also have a moral attitude towards inanimate objects. That maybe seems a bit weird because, you know, dead matter is dead matter. So how can you be immoral towards stones? But actually try to think about human remains in archaeology, or maybe try to think about unspoiled, unpolluted rivers. You should always take care to have a respectful attitude towards whatever you are studying, even though that's inanimate matter. Next, this is very important. You should always obtain permission from the subjects. It's called informed consent. You all know that, of course. And informed consent should be obtained for everything you gather from people explicitly. So they should be fully informed about the purposes of the research, or what you will do with the data, and so on, what your intentions are, whether you intend to share this collected data with anybody, and so on. And the norm here is that that the consent has to be actively given. It's not enough if you just write, by using this site you agree to our cookie policy, or by using this you agree to something. Normally, try to have this as your standard. Always the consent should be an action, an explicit action, whereby the one who consents ticks the box or signs a form and does something actively, not just, you know, like passively, by consenting, so to say, only indirectly, implicitly, by using something. Also, you are supposed to share information with people if you gather their information. So make sure that you disseminate your research with whomever was involved in your research project or research activity. So debriefing is here very important. Next, of course, privacy is very important, and the personal data. So personal data are usually defined as any kind of data that enables you to locate an individual. And you should be careful here, because personal data is not only that whatever has name, first and last name attached to it. Not really, because, you know, often you can identify individuals without their names and last names. So it's important to know that. And here, actually, that's not written on the PowerPoint, but here, but it is important. There is actually a paradox, or not a paradox, but let's call it like a big tension between the following. On the one hand, if you want to gather really quality data, then you have to have as much information as possible. However, with as much information as possible, anonymity is reduced. So those two demands, the quality of data and anonymity, are at odds. And you have to strike a balance between them. For instance, let me give you an example. Let's say that you are collecting wastewaters, and by collecting less wastewaters, you are trying to see whether people in a specific locality use drugs or not. Of course, the more informative your research will be, if you'll be able to specify in which days of the week there are more drugs in the wastewater, in which specific regions there are more present, and so on. So the more informative the data will be, the more easy it will be to locate the individuals. And for instance, from the occurrence of drugs in the wastewaters, you can deduce that it's I'm sorry, there is a helicopter flying over my head, so probably you can hear helicopter noises. So the problem is that you can even infer that drugs in wastewater spike when over the weekend when there are tourists visiting the locality. And now, if you can get the info about who the tourists were that visited the locality, you have it. Then you can specify personal details of people, and even such a seemingly innocent research turns out to be actually problematic from the viewpoint of personal data collection. It could be. I'm not saying it is, but you can see where we are going. So it's very important to keep this in mind. Also, what's very important is the following thing. I work at the Faculty of Education, and professors often tell students, well, make recordings of what you are doing in kindergarten or in the classroom, because that's really important for your reflection, that you will be able to reflect on what is going on, what children said, how the activity went on, and so on. Yes, but what happens if you are recording this on your mobile phone app, which actually does not store the information on your drive, but in the cloud? Then it's actually not you who is the legal owner of the recording, but the company who produced the app. And so if you give them informed consent in which you say that the information will only be kept for your own log, you are actually unintentionally perhaps, but you are deceiving them, because that is not true. You are actually providing the company with the data, with the recordings of your children, for instance. So you have to be very careful here. What you are doing, how you are doing it, and maybe ethical commissions can here actually help you with some guidelines, because they came across these problems maybe in some different contexts and have experience with handling this. So yes, there are a lot of things that we don't consider if we are not reflecting on that. So respect privacy. Another thing is very important. Take care of subjects after the research is over. And also, you should have protocols ready what to do if you discover some anomalies, or that if you discover that somebody needs help when something went wrong. So for instance, let's say that you are a biologist who does research let's say, in a certain ecosystem, and then, I don't know, you are researching frogs. However, you spot that there is something wrong with snakes as well. In this case, you should have a protocol ready that tells you what you will do, whom you will contact, what is in your power, how you can act in order to alleviate that problem that occurred. So even if it's not immediately connected with your research subjects, you are still responsible. This ethical responsibility, as you can see, is pretty big, actually. So you're still responsible to notify about your findings others, and try to help as much as you can. So when you are dealing with human subjects, of course, for instance, if you are a psychologist or if you are an MD, then you should have protocols ready to what to do in case that you discover that actually your research subjects need help. So very, very important thing as well. Also, maybe if I go back to A, inflicting harm, this is also exposing subjects to unpleasant or problematic circumstance. So let's say, for instance, that you are conducting a research about how stress influences cognitive performance, and you put your subjects under a lot of stress, and then they have to do certain tasks, and then your research is over. However, your subjects still feel stressed, and if you just dismiss them, and if you are actually able to show that stress negatively influences cognitive performance, maybe driving a car, then you should definitely not allow those participants to go home on their own, because you are actually exposing them to danger. So you should also keep this in mind, that if you expose subjects to dangerous or harmful situations, it's your responsibility to alleviate them and to repair any harm that might occur. Okay, so next chapter is a research community. You do not only have obligations towards research subjects, of course, but also towards research community. And here again, do not expose your colleagues to unnecessary harm. So you should be aware that people could need help because of burnout, because of compassion crisis, especially if you are conducting experiments on animals or other living beings or humans that are in pain. It's very probable that your colleagues, your assistants, partners, will experience compassion crisis or even shock. So you should have protocols ready how to deal with such situations. So you are also responsible for your colleagues. And also the second part here is that you should build a good academic community. And how to do this, I'll talk about this a little bit later when I'll mention different interpersonal relations that should, or models of interpersonal relations that should be observed at the workplace. Society is the third chapter. So keep in mind that society is at the end the recipient of the results of our research. And so we should always ask ourselves if the research we are conducting is in the best interest of society in general, or whether it only serves some partial interests. And in the later case, that is, of course, highly problematic. Also, you should make sure that there is no discrimination, gender, ethnic, sexual orientation, and so on. And if you have discriminated against groups that are part of your research, they should be proportionally overrepresented. That's generally the rule. Also, try to offer people the opportunity to join your research and to contribute to it. And now the fourth, data. So on the one hand, you have data protection laws, but you also have some general ethical principles about data. And definitely one of the most important ones is truthfulness. So as a scientist, you should always be truthful. So you should only present data into which you sincerely believe, and possibly without self-deception, which is hard because we all know that we want to believe something to be true, especially if we put a lot of energy into it. So, but try to be always try to be truthful. Objectiveness, of course, is another important guiding principle here. Also, impartial presentation. Try not to skew your graphs in such a way that they represent the information in the way you, or only those information you would want to present, but try to impartially present everything that you found out. And also, of course, you should respect the authorship, and you should not copy from others. And I believe this is the case for every sincere scientist. So sometimes you're really sometimes you are disappointed when you find out that somebody just did the research you wanted to conduct. But on the other hand, you know, I always also look at it from this point of view. So my intuition was actually good. I'm on the right track. So, and it's very hard to imagine why someone would try to steal information from others, but it does happen. However, of course, we should always avoid this. Also, if you discover that you were wrong, that you made an error, you should notify others about it, even though if that error is minor and if it doesn't really affect the end results of your study. Still, you know, you never know what will be of interest of others in your research. So you should report all mistakes that you find, if you find them, to the publishers and to the scientific community. So that's about ethics in research in general. Now, next thing I would like to talk about are moral paradigms, or the most common moral theories, because in ethics, as said, is normative science, and it has several theories, and we'll try to take a brief look into them, and by this you will get a feeling what actually the specific moral judgments look like. So the first such theory is so-called utilitarianism. It was developed in Great Britain in 19th century by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And basically the principle of moral action, PMA, I'm using this acronym here, the principle of moral action. So when is behavior moral is the following: if it contributes to the biggest amount of happiness for the largest amount of moral patients. So the utilitarian idea is the following: you should always act in such a way that your actions will result in the biggest happiness for the biggest amount of people, animals, or moral patients in general. So the notion here, moral patient, what does it mean? It means the one towards whom you should behave morally, or the one whom you should take into account in your moral considerations. That's the moral patient. And usually, of course, moral patients are humans and those animals that can feel pain. However, as we saw before, maybe also inanimate matter in certain regards can be considered as a moral patient, because we are supposed to have an attitude of dignity towards it. So that's utilitarianism briefly. Maybe you can look it up on the YouTube, try to see there are some brief videos that will explain to you in more detail what utilitarianism is. It basically is a very widespread moral theory. However, it does have one big problem, namely it allows for sacrificing of the minority for the sake of majority. So try to think about it. If the action is such that if you will sacrifice the well-being of several individuals in order to attain a great benefit for the society, then it seems that this action is ethically permissible from the utilitarian point of view. However, that is problematic. Why is it problematic? Because we have a very strong intuition that individuals have inalienable rights, and that we are not supposed to use others as means to achieve some secondary ends. So this then is a big problem for utilitarianism. Next, you have rule ethics. You have several theories here, but the main idea is that morality comes from rules. So whatever is in accordance with rules is moral. And the most common, perhaps, theory here is God's will. So God sets the rules, and whatever is in accordance with those rules is morally desirable. However, a big problem here is how you interpret God's will. For instance, you know, if you are working in the field of microbiology or genetics, or if you work with I don't know, if you work with some new tools, it's very doubtful what God would say about the moral use of them, you know, because this scenario wasn't present when the tradition was written. So there's no, you don't have any idea what the God would say about it. So you have to interpret God's will, and here, of course, problems can start to occur because some people interpret it in one way, the other in conflicting ways. The next rule ethics theory is contractualism. Here, the idea is that whatever is moral is agreed upon by individuals who enter the moral contract. So those individuals consciously and rationally set the rules, and whatever is in accordance with that is okay, whatever isn't is problematic. Here, of course, the major problem is, what about the evil rules? because we know that rules themselves can be problematic. And it seems that there is no neutral standpoint from which to judge those rules within contractualism. That's why it seems that contractualism actually can only be a part of the story. However, it cannot be the whole story as such. Keep in mind that ideas about ethical commissions and code of ethics are strongly related to contractualism, because they are nothing else as consciously and rationally negotiated norms of conduct. And the basic idea here is actually contractualist. Also, another problem that's implicit in here, but it's not on my PowerPoint, is the following. Sometimes people could just think the following. If you have the rules that have been set by somebody, by an ethical commission or by ethical code, then it's okay to just blindly obey them and not really pay attention to what you are doing. And this is, as you can see, in a stark contrast to what we said in the introduction, that actually it's not the role of ethics to decide instead of you. So you should not abuse contractualism in this way. It's not meant to take the burden of decision making from you. Okay, I know that this is fast forward. That's why you might watch this presentation again at some other time and take pause. However, now we just have to go through that, and I know it's a lot to take in, because you know, it's a whole philosophical discipline that's relevant here. So please bear with me. Now, the third rule ethics theory, it's Kant's categorical imperative. And the idea here is that you should also ask yourself if it's possible that everybody acts in the same way as you. If it is, then generally the action is moral. If this is not possible, then you have a problem, because then it's only you who can act in such a way. Let's take an example. Let's say that I'm a scientist, and then, you know, I see that if I only slightly modify my figures, I will be able to corroborate my hypothesis in much better. And I do that. However, I'm also Kantian, so I ask myself, so what would happen if everybody would act in the same way? Well, what would happen would be the following. No one would read scientific publications, because everybody would be suspicious that other people are lying there only to achieve their own aims. So, as you can see, if everybody would act in such a way, then this would actually undermine the idea of scientific publication. So no one would actually be able to act in this way, because there would be no publications in which you could publish your research. So that's the point of Kant's categorical imperative. And then we have virtue ethics. In virtue ethics, the main idea is that what's morally desirable is in accordance with a certain virtue or a virtuous person. So we have many different virtues, from compassion, perseverance, truthfulness, friendship, generosity, and so on. We have main theories here are Aristotelian ethics and ethics of care. However, you also have a big problem here, because what can you do if two of your virtues are in conflict? Nothing really. So that's the problem. Then you don't have really a good solution to your problem. And one example is the following. Let's say that you are supposed to be compassionate, but also loyal. For instance, loyal to your firm or to the rules. And you know, you should be compassionate, but on the other hand, you should also be strict and should maybe punish individuals that break rules. So compassion and loyalty can be in conflict, and this goes for some other virtues as well. Okay, here we are with models of interpersonal relations in professional settings. Theory says that basically we can have 4 different models. The first model is paternalistic attitude. Here, and if we put this into context of science, here paternalistic attitude would simply mean that you consider scientists to be like a god, and that others have to obey him or her, and he has the final word, and that's it. Now the next model is technical or service model. Here you view a scientist as a servicewoman or a technician who just solves the problems and goes on with her life. Then you have so-called cooperative model, where scientist sees others as partners and also lets them to participate in her research. And actually, they all strive for the same goal. And then the fourth one is a friendly relationship. And this is the case where scientists just goes out drinking with everybody and everybody is just friends. So of course, the last one is utopic. It's not a good setting for professional institutions. And it's not tough to see that the third one, the cooperative one, is the one that is desirable. Let me just briefly touch upon the environmental and animal ethics, because this actually is your area, so I cannot really skip that. So, and I'll try to present this briefly. So basically, environmental and animal ethics are nothing else but ethics in general that's extended beyond human species. So what you do in environmental and animal ethics is that you count as moral patients also non-human subjects. So you say that we are not only morally responsible toward other human beings, but also towards animals and probably also the environment. So principle of moral action within animal ethics, again, depends on moral theory. You have utilitarian animal ethics. Peter Singer, Paola Cavalieri are the main representatives here, and their main idea is welfarism, so that you should avoid causing harm and physical pain and also emotional and psychological harm to animals. Then you have Tom Regan. He would advocate animal rights. Tom Regan would say, no, no, no. The bigger and better cages are not the solution. What we should strive for is to abolish all cages. And Francione is another, a lawyer, I think from Harvard, is another proponent of this line of thinking. He would say the following: well, what we should do is stop considering animals as our property with which we can do whatever we want to. And then you also have virtue ethics. Hirschhaus is author here, so that's another approach in animal ethics. So I think somebody has a mic open because I can hear my my echo in it. So maybe if you check that. And I think it's gone now. So thank you. So here we are. Yes, but generally, the idea in animal ethics is the following: because animals possess nociception, so because they can feel pain and because they can suffer, they are moral patients. So we should consider them from a moral viewpoint. And what follows from this is that causing unnecessary pain is immoral. And now this is for you to think which moral theory would be the closest to this. So from which moral theory this idea could be derived. From one of those moral theories that I was talking before. That's for you to think about, and maybe I'll tell you the answer at the end. So what are the proofs that animals can feel pain? Several: physiological, behavioral, and evolutionary, but I won't go into this because I will be too long. So as you know, there is a 3R rule in animal ethics. So in animal research, you should always replace animals with models or simulations if it's possible. Also, higher taxons should be replaced with so-called lower, that less resemble humans. So that's all within the replacement. Reduction, reducing the number of the animal models, and also refinement of living conditions. That's 3R. A lot has been written about this, so, and I'm sure that you are also familiar with this principle. I'm adding an extra principle here by saying that research is allowed only if it serves vital interests. If you are really trying to discover something important here, if you are only trying to do some cosmetic or taste flavor enhancers and so on, that's not vital interest, and then animal research becomes highly morally problematic. Yes, let's go quickly to land ethic. Aldo Leopold, American forester and philosopher, really an icon. A Sand County Almanac is something that every American perhaps knows. At least that was my impression. So he had this idea that an action in environmental ethics, if you have an action, you always have to consider if it contributes to stability, integrity, and beauty of biota or ecosystems. If it doesn't, then it's immoral. And here again, you stumble on the same problem as we saw in utilitarianism. So what about the well-being of individuals? Because here it seems that only wholes like ecosystems are considered from a moral viewpoint. And then Arne Næss and deep ecology. I'm sure you all heard about Arne Næss. He was a Norwegian philosopher, passed away in 2007, and he had this idea that what you should strive for is deep ecology. So don't be anthropocentric, considering everything from a human perspective. Try to assume biocentric perspective. Try to see the world from the viewpoint of everything that's alive. And that's also the difference between so-called shallow and deep ecology, because shallow ecology attributes only instrumental value to nature and sees it as a resource. And you can have environmental action within shallow ecology, but that environmental action will only be a managing of resources. If you have a true deeply ecological action, for Arne Næss at least, you will respect the intrinsic value of nature, and you will see nature as an end in itself, not only as a means of achieving our goals. Also, what Næss thought was that we will achieve this deep ecology if we will, so to say, if we will deepen ourselves, if we will extend ourselves, start being egoistic, and try to see that actually our interests match interests of other living beings. Okay, now the last thing, please stay with me for another 3 minutes. The fourth and the last section of my presentation is moral motivation. Of course, when we have moral action, what's really important is what motivates us towards it. And here I like this quote by Michelle Moody Adams, a philosopher from Princeton, I think. She says the following: the principal barriers to moral progress in beliefs are not ignorance or a lack of a revolutionary new moral idea, but affected ignorance of what we can and should, what can and should already be known. So what she wants to say, it's not the problem that we wouldn't know what the right conduct is. The problem is that we don't want to know, so that we are willfully ignorant. And we can explain our willful ignorance by theory of cognitive dissonance. I'll illustrate to you here what this theory says about our motivation. It was first designed by Leon Festinger proposed by Festinger in 1957, and the theory says the following. So the first principle of the theory is that we as humans always avoid mental conflict. And the second principle is that we try to do this with the least possible effort. So now let's take an example of a cognitive conflict. Let's take a person who has the following 3 ideas. I like to live a long life, or long life is desirable. Next, smoking causes cancer and it shortens life, of course. And then I smoke. So that's you have a cognitive conflict here, because if you smoke, then you are precisely doing what you don't want to be doing, and that's conflicting. So according to the theory, to the first principle, you'll strive to alleviate this conflict. So what can you do? You can quit smoking. However, as we all know, well, I at least, that's difficult. So it's much more likely that you'll do something else. Because remember the second principle, right? We will try to alleviate the conflict with the least possible effort. And so what could happen is that you'll just delete the second thought and you'll say, well, smoking maybe causes cancer, however, not to me, because I have smoking genes. Also, what you could do, you could say, well, YOLO, you only live once. So yeah, it's nice to live a long life, but you don't, if you don't really enjoy it, then it's not really good to live long. It's better to enjoy yourselves. Or what you could do is you could add a new thought, and you could say, well, the deadline is approaching. I have to submit this research proposal. If I don't do this, I'll stay without funding. And now it's really not the time to quit, because if I quit, then I'll be stressed out and then I won't be able to submit my research. Now, that's only an illustration that's very common in literature of cognitive dissonance, but I'm sure that you get the idea how you could apply this to moral motivation in general. Let's say that you are a scientist and that you are convinced that truthfulness is important. You also think that the part of truthfulness is that you share all the info with the scientific community. However, if you do that with your research right now, then maybe, your point will not come across as strongly as it will if you just keep certain info out. So you omit some information. And now you are in cognitive conflict. So what will you do? Of course, you can always include information, but this means revoking previous publications. It means trouble and complication. So what you could do, you could say, well, not really. Well, it's important to share all info, but not in this instance, because the most important part is correct. So why would I bother? I don't have to present everything. Or you could say, well, who cares? As long as I get the funds, and fame, it doesn't really matter. However, I think it's really not a lot of people that would do C. Maybe you could do D. You would say, well, this time this happened, but that's a good lecture and good lessons for next time. I'll be much more careful next time, and I'll try to present everything, but not now, because if I do this now, then this means trouble. So to sum up, the problem here with moral motivation is the following. It's not the thing that we don't know what's the right thing to do. We know that. However, because so many things, because as we say, the moral conduct is expensive in the sense of resource, not only monetarily, but in the sense of that it costs you, that sometimes it is disadvantageous for you, and so on. We try to avoid acting morally, even though we know what the right conduct is. So that is a really big problem. And this is something that we all have to address intimately in our own thinking, and be aware that we are human beings who try to rationalize and who try to avoid information, and who are inclined to be willfully ignorant. So this is the end of my presentation. I'm sorry I was a bit